And I really just dove into my education. So through my philosophy classes, I really started to realize that it really hit me hard that I was in a cult. I
Mhm.
mean, the deconstruction started for me right away is because I'm learning critical thinking. I am learning how to pinpoint bullshit. I'm learning, symbolic logic where you're, breaking
Mhm.
down sentences and finding truth values. Like you're
Yeah.
learning so much. And it's just naturally, I was like, wow, I can't believe that I fell for that.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Truth That Heals podcast. Today, I'm with special guest Ari Sherwood, who is the host of the podcast, the Disillusioned Podcast. Welcome to the show, Ari. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. Thank you so much for having me.
It's great to have you on the show. And before we even begin, because I've already introduced you as the host of this podcast, can you share with us a little bit about yourself and where your story really begins?
Yeah, for sure. So I am a cult survivor. My story actually begins in childhood. So I was raised as an evangelical. My parents were I actually a part, it wasn't traditional Christianity. They were a part of an evangelical cult. Um, Actually quite similar to your story, I have to say. Listening to your story on Disillusioned, I was like, wow, there's just so many similarities here with this Christian based cult. So my parents were really extreme, like they were very much into it. They did leave this group by the time I was born, but they were still in this belief system. So I was raised in this belief system. And so I was homeschooled until third grade. And then I went to Baptist school. So, I mean, I was really kind of primed to join a cult later just because of the way that my life had been growing up. It was just your norm. So, and I wasn't really like in society, right? Like I was homeschooled. And so you're not really prepared for the world as you grow up. So, and I ended up transitioning to public school. At a certain point, I denounced Christianity. I decided it wasn't for me. And that started this journey of figuring out what was for me, right? So I was still spiritual and I started looking more into spirituality and became very curious on that level. So when I was 19, well, was I 19? Yeah. So I went to massage school and got my massage certification. So I decided to do a trade. And there was this holistic health center that was downtown Flushing, Michigan, where I had lived at the time. So I went to this holistic health center trying to find a job, right? And I walked in there and there's this man sitting there and he just had this presence to him that literally drew you in right away. Like he was just so mysterious. He had this very low, soothing, deep voice. And he was just very charismatic, very charming, very, he just looked like he knew things in life. You know what I mean? So when I met this man, he was the owner of the Holistic Health Center, and I sat with him and, I'm looking for a job and all these things. And he was just so here for it. Just open arms for sure. Absolutely. You can work with us. And so while this was going on, I'm sitting having this conversation with him. There were students teaching a class while I was sitting talking to him. And I was, of course, inquiring about what was going on, what they were doing at the center. And so those students were teaching some energy therapy. He started telling me about his energy therapy that he teaches, and it's not Reiki, it's nothing like that. It's so much better. Um, I'm a psychic, he's a psychic, and he's giving me like a mini reading, which at the time seemed pretty accurate. So he really just sucked me in. And I was so curious to learn more about this energy therapy. So he invited me to come to classes as well. He's like, you want to try it out? I'm like, for sure. I would love to learn more about what you guys are doing. So I started attending classes every week. And at first, it was really fun. It was like psychic training. You're flipping a coin with a partner, heads or tails. You're doing remote viewing, which was something that he would teach, like what's in the envelope. You have to psychically see these things. So he was teaching all these things. And it was fun,
Mhm.
right? It was fun. Everyone got along, and you're just meeting all these different people. That business was really thriving at the time. So as time goes on, you kind of get sucked deeper and deeper, and you're more involved. I'm also working there. And then, I just got so into it. I was so serious about it. I absolutely loved going to these classes. But as time goes on, it gets more serious. And he started to shift a bit here. Well, I guess before the shift happened, I should mention. So he's actually offered me a place to live. He had another student who was looking for a roommate, and he's like, hey, why don't you get out of your parents' house and, go and live with her, be independent, things like that. And at the time, you just think that this man cares about you and he's just trying to help you out in life. Here's a home, split rent, all this stuff. So of course, I'm like, for sure, I want to get out of my parents' house. I'm ready for that. So I moved in with a student. And I had no idea that he was also going to be living there.
Mhm.
So he also ended up moving in with us as well. And another student also moved in. So I was like surrounded all the time, right? I am absolutely indulging in this cult. And so we're living together, which is so common, right? Like that's just kind of what happens. You do end up just becoming so fully involved, and you do live with these people and they become like your best friends. So I'm living there, and the teachings started to shift and get more serious. He's One night he told us he had visions of doomsday his whole life since he was a child. At this time, um, December 21st, 2012 was a huge thing. The Mayan calendar is all over the History Channel. He really took that and used it as part of his teachings, like the end of the world's coming. So at this point, we're all so invested in this group, and we're all like, okay, like we got to prepare. He brought out a map of the world of what he says the parts of the world that are going to be safe, and we're not in a safe part, so we have to move to the mountains of Tennessee to survive. So at the time, I was not moving. I was in a relationship. I actually ended up getting kicked out of the trailer that I was
Mhm.
living in with the students because we had some drama, and moved in with my boyfriend at the time. So as time went on, the leader, actually, his name is Jeffrey Pierce. I do want to say that. So that was his name. He was chipping away at my relationship with my boyfriend at the time. And eventually it got to the point where he was like, if you don't come with us, like you're going to die. And so, considering I think at the time I was already having like relationship problems anyways. So, broke up with my boyfriend. I made arrangements to move, and I didn't tell anyone right away because I didn't want anyone to talk me out of it. So one night Jeff texts me and he's like, hey, why are you so sad? One night I was like at home and I was feeling sad. And he's like, why are you so sad? You should come over and hang out with us. It was him and another student. So I went over there, and this was the night he proposed to me. So it was so random. Like it truly was. It was like I walk in there, not in a good mental space as it was. And he's telling me that um, he had a very specific teaching about romance. So he had this hierarchy, like, the twin flames and soulmates, but he had
Right.
another level, which was called a oneness. And that was just me and him, right? And there was only one in the whole universe. And we are that one soul that split apart. And he claimed to be Jesus Christ. So he told me I was Mary Magdalene, right? And that I was his person. So he's like, marry me. And he told me if I didn't marry him, that he would drink bleach and kill himself. So it was just such a weird moment. And I think in that moment, my intuition knew this was wrong. Like there's clearly something wrong here because there was nothing between us or and he was 37 years older than me. Um, but I was so brainwashed. I really believed. I'm like, okay, well, and I guess then we'll be together because what other choice do I have, right? Like you're telling me that if it's not you, it's no one. And so I agreed. There was another student who witnessed the whole thing. And after that, we're planning on moving. Things shifted a little bit, quite a bit, actually. Once the other students found out that him and I were together, we lost probably half of them
Wow.
because they were like, what?
Mhm.
Like, this is not right. Like, you are so much older than her. Like, what is this? And so I think half of them left the group and were really upset about the situation. So we moved with the remaining students to the mountains, and it, just kind of moved on. We started a new holistic health center. We changed our name, and that's something that he was always doing was his businesses were always shifting. So we started a paranormal research group. He was teaching hypnotherapy, hypnosis, and he was conducting hypnosis on everyone pretty regularly, really doing past life regressions. And he would always lead everyone he hypnotized. He would always implant these things into their minds, memories, which, I'm conducting interviews with ex-members from my group and to hear their memory or the things that he put into their minds that they still struggle with is absolutely insane. Like this person was just a master manipulator. He was so good at what he did. And, he did the same to me, but those memories just didn't hold in my brain because I just didn't believe it, I guess, when he was
Mhm.
doing my hypnosis. I knew it wasn't coming from me. So it was hard for me to like be like, oh yeah, I remember that. But I would play along, I guess. So as time goes on, it just got more and more intense. Students were dropping like flies. His training was intense. We were doing a lot of sleep deprivation. We were also very much into exorcisms, and demons were our enemy. Satan was our enemy. He was an ex-Satanist, apparently. And so he taught a lot about Satanism and a lot about things like that with framing it as, this is your enemy. And this is what we have to fight in life because I'm Jesus, right? Like Lucifer is my enemy. So that's what you're doing, and that's what you're learning. So everyone, it just got so intense. Especially I think when sleep deprivation was happening and it was really changing you. So I also ended up gaining a bunch of weight. Like I gained like 80 pounds when I was in this group. He encouraged it. He like didn't want me to be skinny. It was, a control thing is what it was, which I think is really common in cults,
Mhm.
controlling a person's diet like that. So we went through a lot. Our business ended up failing, but we did so much online. We had just everything was pretty much online at that point. So even though our physical business failed, we were
Mhm.
doing everything online, recruiting people. And we were also working with the Mutual UFO Network, doing hypnosis on alien abductees and things like that. So we were just so involved in all these different avenues. He had his hands in everything. So even he did end up getting sick. Well, I guess before I can get into that. So we did get married. He convinced me to get a tattoo of his name on my chest, which is still there to this day with this wolf right here. And another one that says always and forever. Uh, which now I realize like how manipulative this was to, it was all his idea. He was like, this is a present for you. We're going right now and you're going to go get my name tattooed on you, just really establishing that I am his in a way. Like I was very dehumanized, but I didn't realize it. I wasn't allowed to leave alone. I always had to have a man with me. Um, I went I went to college for less than a year at the time. He had us enroll in college to basically take advantage of the grant money we would receive. And then he called me one day and made me drop out. He didn't want me there. He didn't want me to. He told me I had a duty at home to take care of him. At this time, I did have a baby as well. So I ended up also having his child. Um, so I was very much controlled. I didn't have free will or anything at this point in time. But it was interesting because I wasn't fully consciously aware of it either, right? Like I didn't know that I was being controlled. I thought I couldn't leave alone because he was protecting me and he wanted me to be safe. And that's why I had to have a man with me all the time. I didn't realize it was, he didn't want me to run away. He didn't want, like I didn't know this stuff. I spent so much time with him, so he had so much time with me to really manipulate me and control me. So he ended up getting sick, really sick. He already had struggled with congestive heart failure. So he got a staph infection in his arm. And of course, I was his wife, so I had to take care of him. He didn't want nurses or anything. So the staph infection was antibiotic resistant. And it just wouldn't go away. Eventually, it did kill him. He ended up dying at home. And I think that was the point in time where obviously everything changed for me when he died. I still, I feel like if he wouldn't have died, like who knows what would have happened? Like how long I would have been in that. So once he died, all of a sudden everything changed and I could do things on my own again. I could leave and I was in control of my life, but I was unprepared for that. I didn't have any skills. I couldn't find a job. I ended up being homeless. Well, I was like squatting in our home for a minute before I ended up leaving and moving to a different state because I just had to figure things out. I didn't know what to do. And, I had my baby. Um, Eventually I ended up coming back home to Michigan and staying with family again and kind of reconnecting with my family again, which they were really happy about. And so I ended up working as a massage therapist. And I was thriving doing massage. I was really good at my job and I got really into yoga. So I went all in on yoga. I ended up going to take a course to get my yoga teacher certification and things like that. And, I was still brainwashed at this time. So this is a few years later. So I'm still brainwashed, but I was making life work at this point. So I had plans to open a business, or maybe a holistic health center, but massage, yoga, and things like that. And I ended up, like, my whole life ended up changing at this point. So one night I woke up and I was just in excruciating pain in my arms. Oh my gosh, it was horrible. So I have a genetic condition that um, I've had my whole life. I was born with it. It runs in my family. So I've always had these episodes of extreme pain throughout my life, but I never had one like this. It was, I would say, the pain I would say is on par with childbirth, and it would be like constant. So what happens, this conditions called hereditary neuralgic amyotrophy. And what happens is your immune system attacks this main nerve called the brachial plexus nerve, which controls a bunch of main functions in your body. So I ended up, it started in my arms and everything. And there's just pain and numbness, like you stop feeling. And my hands and my wrists ended up completely paralyzed. Like I could not move them. It was like just probably like a week or so in. And all of a sudden, yeah, my hands are out. Can't move them, can't feel anything. It was um so intense for me at the time. And it was shocking because so my career was built on my physical strength. And, I was in prime peak physical condition. I obviously lost the weight that I had gained in the cult and, really worked on myself on that level. So, having paralysis in my hands and my wrists was absolutely devastating. It was something that just completely changed my life. So, I couldn't, it's like you can't sleep, you can't eat. Um, you're on a bunch of medication. I was having nightmares where my hands would be like working and they'd be moving, but I would wake up and I couldn't move. And it would just freak me out. Like I was just having all these crazy mental things going on. And, I think at that point in my life, I was just so sick of everything. I was just devastated that, because, when you develop a disability, like everything's on the line at that point, right? Like I don't have a job anymore. Like how are we going to make it? Like how am I going to figure my life out at this point? And I was so frustrated because I had felt like I went through so much already in my life. And I was 26 years old at this time. And I was just like, what the heck? So I went through this, I would say like a 3-month period contemplating living, right? I was like, I think at a point I made my mind up that I didn't want to live if my hands didn't come back, which like I have a really great doctor, like top notch. He didn't think my hands would come back at that point in time. It had been months and I had no progress. So I was so devastated and I was like, that's it. I can't do life anymore. Like I'm done. If my hands don't come back, then like I'm done with my life. Like I don't want to do this anymore. So it was obviously just such an intense 3-month period of my life, right? Where I'm sitting there really thinking about this. So I had two kids at this point. They were very young. And I think, one morning I kind of woke up and made that conscious choice to live. And, I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to do that to my children. I had to figure out the next question I had to answer now that I know I want to live is how am I going to do that? Like, how am I going to keep going? So I ended up finding this man who was a yoga practitioner who owned a yoga studio that was local. And he did counseling and things like that. So I went to him. I told him what was going on with me and that I wanted to, move forward in my life and I want to live. So I need to figure out what to do next. Like, how can I get myself out of this bad state of mind that I'm in? And that man saved my life. Like he, I think because I came from the yoga discipline, he used that obviously for me and gave me breathing exercises and different meditations. And he really focused on meaning making and purpose. How are we going to help you to create purpose in your life again now? Your life's not over. You just have to find something else. And he introduced me to positive psychology, which is it focuses because psychology focuses so much on depression and like the dark side of psychology. So positive psychology focuses on like it reframes it, what makes people happy? How can we make people happier? How can we help people with resilience? How can we, like that's what positive psychology studies. And he taught me about post-traumatic growth, which is this phenomenon that happens to people who have been through the work, like traumatic events, but were able to overcome it and actually end up better than they were before, right? Like it's post-traumatic growth. It's the literal opposite in a way of post-traumatic stress disorder.
Mm.
So it was so interesting. And it's something I have seen within the cult survivor community. Oh my gosh, like all these people who I see have experienced post-traumatic growth after their trauma is incredible to me, right? So learning about this, I was like, wow, this is just so fascinating. And I ended up enrolling in college. So you have to keep in mind, though, this whole time I am still brainwashed, like the whole time. All these things are going, and I still haven't gotten to that point in my journey to even realize I was in a cult yet, right? So at this point, it's been almost 5 years that I had left by the time I enrolled in college. And so in college, so I decided, yes, I'm going to enroll in college. I'm going to do something new. And I loved school so much. And I think it meant a lot to me because prior I was forced to drop out of college and I didn't want to at the time. So going back felt so good. And that's where I was introduced to philosophy. I went to major in psychology. And then I took an intro to philosophy class. And I think what resonated with me a lot was the fact that all the things they were talking about were things that I had heard from Jeff. But I didn't know that this wasn't original thought of Jeff's, right? Like these things all were ancient, right? Came from all these different philosophers like thousands of years ago. And I'm over here like, whoa, wait a minute, what is going on here? And like, look at all these other perspectives. There's, and it really almost right away got me thinking. So I fell in love with philosophy and decided to add philosophy as a major as well. And I really just dove into my education. So through my philosophy classes, I really started to realize that it really hit me hard that I was in a cult. I mean, the deconstruction started for me right away is because I'm learning critical thinking. I am learning how to pinpoint bullshit. I'm learning, symbolic logic where you're, breaking down sentences and finding truth values. Like you're
Yeah.
learning so much. And it's just naturally, I was like, wow, I can't believe that I fell for that. Or, that those feelings. So I really got into philosophy and psychology. I ended up working in a bunch of different psychology research labs and evolutionary psychology labs and social psychology, and I loved research. And I loved philosophy. Philosophy was the tool of deconstruction for me. It was the way that I was able to form my own values and my own opinions and my own beliefs, not based on what someone else was telling me, but through my own thinking. And it really changed my life at that point. So it was definitely a journey going through that. And and it's something that I think you still go through, right? Like I still go through this deconstruction to this day. And, but it's just crazy how I was led to that. Because thinking my disability was just this horrible thing. But then I'm like, wow, I don't know if I ever would have really gotten to this point had that not happened to me and had I not enrolled in school and like had that shift in my life. So it was just this, a crazy series of events that led me here
Mhm.
to this point in time.
I wanted to go back, and you spoke about how kind of out of the blue he proposed to you.
Hmm.
But I don't think you really talked about your dating, because usually when you're first you start dating, like this is the road that I see, like in a relationship. I'm gonna start dating somebody, and maybe like 6 months in or a year in, whatever, then you propose. How long had you been dating at that time before Jeff proposed to you?
Um, I wasn't dating him.
So it was just out of the blue to say, let's get married.
Yeah, we weren't dating. It was literal out of the blue random proposal.
And you told him yes, but what were you feeling at that moment?
Confused, and I think, I knew it was weird. I mean, I knew that instinctively. I'm like,
Mhm.
but I had cognitive dissonance where I like overrode that thought that it was weird and was like, well, there was just this pressure that was put on me in this moment, and it was so coercive because he's basically telling me that if I say no, like I'm responsible for
Mm.
him killing himself. And, so he knew exactly what he was doing. And I think he just knew that I was the perfect target for this.
So he was very manipulative, huh?
He
This
was a
guy.
ma- he was a mastermind, absolutely intelligent.
So while he proposed to you and you knew that like deep down there's something wrong, I kind of wanted to use that example and now jump to another example because you mentioned about his supposed power of hypnosis where he would, implant memories in people, and some people would wake up and be like, "Oh yeah, that did happen to me." Those memories, yeah, that's true. But you mentioned earlier that you knew that it was wrong, but you said there, I played along with it.
Hmm.
And it seems like, with the proposal, although you knew it was wrong, you played along with it.
Yep.
Um, do you think that has some foundation from your time as a child in that evangelical cult setting?
Right. That's a really good question. I mean, I'm sure that my childhood programming influenced everything to come. Especially because in the evangelical way of being, especially with my family, I mean, women were second class citizens. Women, they call them the help meet is what they're called. They're basically there to serve their husbands. My parents were taught this very awful belief that um, women are daughters of Eve, right? We are worse than men. Like we are witches. We need to be tamed. So I think in a way, being raised thinking like maybe witnessing this in a way, right? Like witnessing the dynamic um, for my mom and, being taught, and I guess in this way, you do grow up as a woman being more submissive. You do, you
Mhm.
might, yeah, you're going to be more submissive. You're going to probably more likely go along with things that, you shouldn't. You weren't really taught to stand up for yourself or to say no and things like that. So, I mean, I'm sure that, I'm not even sure. I know that my upbringing had a huge influence on everything else that came later, you know.
So, wow. So, yeah, that's one of the things about cults is, especially towards women, sadly, is kind of looking at them like less than. I mean, not even. not even really part of the community, not even part of the family. Like there's no voice. So
Hmm.
how long did it think how long do you think it took for you after leaving this culty environment that you were in? How long from then when you left to you finding the ability or finding a way to claim your own voice? How long do you think that took for you? Because you've even started your own podcast.
Hmm. Yeah. So I think that's something. Okay, so 5 years it took me to figure out I was brainwashed. So from the point Jeff died to the point that I think I was in school for at least a year before I really could process that information and really come to terms with things. So it was like 5 years before I could really figure things out. And I had my voice in school. That's what we were taught, was to debate
Mhm.
and discuss. And that's all we did. And I loved doing that. And I think I found my voice in those moments where was very opinionated and like realized I believed in a lot of things, and I had a lot to say. So I think in school, I definitely found that voice of mine. But then I think I would go back and forth too, because, it's so unconscious, your programming from the cult, right? So
Mhm.
if you're not consciously aware of these things, it's going to keep influencing your life until you are aware of it, right? So I think, there were times in my life where then I would lose my voice again, like especially after I got out of college, in relationships. I feel like, I would go into that cult personality. Like it just depended on who I was interacting with, though. So if I met people, I would meet people who apparently, weren't good for me, and activated that personality,
Mhm.
and I would become that. And like having to work through that and really become aware, because I thought that knowing that I was brainwashed was enough. And then I found out it's not enough, because I'm still acting this way. I'm still allowing these behaviors to happen, even though I'm not even in a cult anymore. And that was a whole nother level of reflection. Um, and in that reflection is when I decided to start the podcast and um speak my mind again, and use my
Mhm.
voice again, because I've learned so much. And it's so important to have these conversations and to use your voice, especially when you learn things in life, that should be shared. So, starting the podcast was definitely an act of agency. Absolutely. It was a way for me to take my power back, to use my voice again. And I think it started as a way to assist myself in my healing and deconstruction, which it did, and it took me starting the project. Like, I have not launched podcast yet. I'm like right on the cusp of that, though. Like, it is about to launch here, I would say, in the next few weeks. But there's just so much you have to do to get it going. So I've been in that process, but in this process of just building it, oh my gosh, the I learn so much more, and I'm able to go deeper into, I guess, my own deconstruction, especially my interviews with ex members from my group. I have so many blocks in my memory. And when I listen to them, I'm like, oh my God, I remember.
Mhm.
I start remembering so much more. And then, I think as you remember things, it takes you deeper into your healing, because these are things I blocked out. So it's been wonderful. And I think as the evolution of the podcast, as I've gotten closer to launching, and now I see it, as a tool of, it's not just for me anymore, right? Like now it's for others, and like even just, and especially the ex members of my group. It's like for you guys to sit here and tell your story for the first time. None of us have done that.
Mhm.
Or I mean, I have, I've started that, and it's amazing that, all these years have gone by, and this really has not came out, even though this man was a expert con man and he traveled all over. And he didn't just travel, he also did so much online.
Mhm.
And he was back in the day doing AOL chat rooms, psychic readings, and recruiting people online. And then Facebook came and he's doing the same thing on Facebook, and this person just he was it's pretty insane, how much he had done in his life, and that just attention was never brought to it.
Now, I wanted to go to your education because you said you studied philosophy and you loved the logic. While you're going through this period in your life where there's logic, you're trying to discover in a sentence, what are the fallacies, what are the truths. Was there ever a moment where you said, I can use this and examine my experiences with Jeff? And when you started doing that, what did you discover?
That, oh man, I discovered, well, right away. I mean, it was like instinctive to start picking away at my life experiences, and the things I was taught. It's just came with the degree, which
Mhm.
I will say, like, not just for me, but for any person who majors in philosophy or gets a degree in philosophy, I feel like this is very common for any of us. It doesn't matter what you've been through. It just naturally makes you break down your beliefs. It's like almost a necessary part of learning philosophy because you have to open your mind and like
Oh yeah.
really consider other arguments and take them very seriously. And you have to find the strengths in the other arguments. And that's like the best way to have a strong argument yourself against it, is to fight the strengths and not the weaknesses. So like you naturally, I just looked and started breaking it all down. And what I realized was that it was all bullshit. And I realized that this person must have been very intentional.
Mhm.
He had definitely thought this through. Absolutely. Every single detail. I mean, you realize these things, and especially when you put the pieces together, you're like, wow, he really fooled everyone. And I guess I didn't mention he was blind as well. Um, and he had his whole life taken care of.
Was
So,
he one of those cult leaders? Because there are a variety of cults. There are, those self-development cults, there are religious cults, and then there are like kind of a family setting cult. But in this different variety of cults, you see leaders, not always, but many times, where they're slobs. The leaders want everyone else to cater to them, to kiss their ass, pretty much.
oh,
So was he anything like that?
yeah. He was not independent in any way. And I know he did that on purpose. Absolutely. I know he having me take care of him 24/7 had me under full control. It's just a tool.
Hmm.
And I believe he was fully capable of being more independent. He refused to use his cane. He like refused to adapt. He didn't use that cane. He didn't try. He expect everyone took care of him. Yes, we all did, every one of us, but probably me more than everyone, but some other students as well just were right there with me, doing everything. And I like when I was in college, I remember there was a girl in my school who was she was fully blind. She was born blind though, but she navigated effortlessly with her cane. She had the whole campus memorized. She didn't need any help from anyone. And she always stood out to me because I was like, wow, like how independent she is. Like, why didn't he ever try? Well, he didn't try because it was perfect for him. He didn't have to, you know. We cooked, we did cleaned, we did everything. And so no, everyone else is paying rent. Everyone's giving him all their money, Another student. I remember this other student would come home from work every day and hand over his tips. It was just like clockwork.
Mhm.
No one even questioned it. So he was taken care of for sure.
And during your time together, because you were married with him for how long? 5 years, was it?
No, I was married, so it wasn't too long, but it was, let me think here. I think it was a year and a half, actually. So I was in the group from 19. He died right before I turned 23. So I was in the
Mhm.
group 19 to 23. So I
Okay.
married him around 20, between like right before I turned 21, around that time. So I was like 20 when I like legally married him. So yeah, I was in that like 4 or 5 years before
Okay.
I.
So not that long, but still the damage
Mm-mm.
was done. Uh,
Yeah.
during during your time with him in this kind of it sounds like a shotgun wedding kind of in this anyways. During your time with him, did you love him?
No. And I knew that, like, not at first. At first, I like was convinced I did. Literally, like, I I think, you have to convince yourself in that kind of situation. But I think when he was really sick and I was taking care of him the way I was, and I did not sleep. I couldn't stress this enough. Like the whole time. I did not sleep. Is barely. So I didn't get to sleep. He would wake me up every night, all night for things that he needed, or like he really didn't allow that. So I think I went under sleep deprivation a lot of the time. And um so I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought. What was the question again?
Did you love him?
Okay, yeah. So no. And so I'm taking care of him and I'm not sleeping. And I remember getting to that point, at that point, being thinking, I started to think this, right? I started to think, do I even love this guy? Like this is awful.
Mhm.
I can't do anything. Like I had no freedom. I was like a slave to him. And honestly, I was. Absolutely. That's what that is. And no, I did not. But I felt guilty for feeling that way when I
Mhm.
had those thoughts. You are programmed to feel that, like this is my apparent oneness, the person I'm supposed to be with, and I should feel guilty if I don't love him, which in our group, a lot of members went through that. He would assign soulmates basically. So he would tell you who your soulmate was, and no one loved their soulmate, right? Like, so everyone went through that, and his teachings was that, if you leave your soulmate, um, you're screwed. You're not going to find love and you're going to have a shitty life because you left your person. And that's a lot of students thought that, and it's super sad to me because it's like, even if their relationships don't work out in life after leaving the cult, I've had students ask me, like, is the reason my relationships don't work out because I left my soulmate? And I'm like, no, it's not. And having to be honest and say that out loud, like, that all these years and you still think that way, the impact he had on these people, it's amazing. So it was a big thing in our group, soulmates. And um
Is the group still around in any form?
I don't know. It's hard to say. I didn't fully, I pretty much, yeah, I don't have much to do with many people from the group anymore. I know there are still believers, absolutely. Absolutely. There are still people who believe, still people who, they've created like their own religion out of this, right? Like, and I don't know if anyone's ever taken it farther and started their own group. Like, I don't know any of that. And I don't know even who all is out there, to be honest, which is a big part of doing this podcast for me is I would love to find people who are victim of him because I know there are so many more. Like I just know it. And he'd been doing this for how many years? I mean, when I met him was the last how many years of his life? It was at the end of his life. He had already been doing this for many years up to that point. When he came to Michigan and opened a business, he had one in New Mexico. And he came
Huh.
to Michigan from New Mexico and had a business. He lived everywhere. So I couldn't imagine who all is out there and how many people's lives were impacted and how many people still believe. I couldn't comprehend it. So I don't know, but I hope to find that out as time goes on with the podcast and telling our stories. I hope that other people find me.
What was the transformation like from being used to having total reliance on someone else
Mhm.
to now having the power to make your own decisions?
Oh, it's a hard struggle because like I said earlier, I wasn't aware that I didn't know how to make decisions, right? Like I was lacking in that self-awareness. And so I'm going through life like having these crazy situations or relationships with people that would go like, it would be like a controlled thing or like I would make myself smaller and be submissive, like naturally I would, and I didn't understand it for so long until it just hit me, one day I'm like, oh my God, I'm still brainwashed. That's why I am allowing this behavior. That is why it's so hard to walk away and it's so hard to make decisions for myself. It hit me like a ton of bricks. And so, it looks, I guess, it took me quite a while to get to that point, and I went through a lot with a lot of different people to make myself even aware that, this unconscious influence that was going on in my life that made me susceptible to these sorts of relationships with people or these types of people. So, yeah, it's a huge transformation because you know, it feels weird at first because setting boundaries with people feels weird at first because you feel like you're being mean or you try to make excuses for people like, oh, or really gaslighting yourself into thinking you're the problem, right? Because you're setting a boundary. And also, I think learning to respect other people's boundaries was also something that I had to learn as well because in the group, you have no boundaries both ways. Like it's not just me establishing boundaries, but me also respecting boundaries. So, these are all things I had to learn over time. And, sometimes when you learn to set boundaries, it can look and seem like maybe you're being mean or cold or something. But
Mhm.
nowadays, I've definitely gotten over that feeling, and I know now that boundaries are the most healthy thing a person can have, So,
No,
um,
you're totally hitting on an important spot right now because myself, I've been in a cult, and
mhm,
you've established in the beginning that there are so many similarities in our experiences, and there are. And one of the, I think, something that a lot of us face is the removal of boundaries, of respecting boundaries, because when we're the members, or like when
mhm,
we're in it, you can't have boundaries, you can't have
exactly.
independence, you can't be yourself, and if you are yourself, there's going to be punishments, or there's going to be maybe a humiliation or something. There's something that's going to be done to make you feel even smaller. So you're really hitting on a very important factor of life after you're leaving a cult, because there, like
Yeah.
you've said, oh, what are, how are people going to take it? If I'm setting boundaries, maybe I'm going to be seen as a bad person.
Right.
um what was this? Do you have any examples of setting boundaries after leaving the cult
Mm.
that you can share? If not, no worries.
Right. Oh, I'm sure there's lots of examples. But I could think a great example is actually my kids, being a mom and learning to set boundaries with my children. It's right, like something you wouldn't even think about, but then being a yes person, right? And not being able to say no. I mean, with your kids too.
Yeah.
It affects every part of your life. So I think, even with my kids, I had to learn to set boundaries and say no. And
Oh,
then,
good.
or I mean, in a lot of aspects of my life, with anyone, I think that was a big realization I had, was that because I didn't have boundaries. I was like, oh my God, people, that's why this is all happening, because it's like, um, people can just walk all over you because you don't have that, or just, yeah, saying no
Like,
when it's
did you
good.
feel like you had to serve at all times? Like you had to please
Hmm.
everybody? Because when we can, maybe kind of talk about this and kind of compare, contrast our experiences, our emotions. But I felt that deep inside, there were things that I was told to do that I was thinking, man, this is ridiculous. But I didn't have any
Hmm.
boundaries. Kind of like what you were saying, you gotta play along with it. Um,
Hmm.
but I would do it, but I would feel miserable. And over time, I felt, when I eventually left, I didn't know anymore how to make my own decisions. Um, because I always felt like I had to please everybody else.
Hmm.
Was that
Exactly.
was that something that you kind of went through, that you had to please everybody else?
So bad. But again, that goes back to my childhood, like
Yes.
evangelical. It does, but it made, absolutely, I total people pleaser. Like people could ask me in the most ridiculous requests that I got to go out of my way
Hmm.
completely, don't even want to do it. But then I didn't know how to say no. And I went through that a lot, like with a lot of people. It took me a long time to really get to that point of being like, okay, it's okay to tell people no, especially if you don't want to do it. And it's practice, and I had to practice a lot, And it's still something I feel I work on, obviously today too. But it's not so much a challenge anymore. But yeah, I definitely was a people pleaser, and it just caused me problems in my life with other people. And it also made me realize too, like I also expected, because of the lack of boundaries, it's like I expected other people to also have lack of boundaries in a way. But
Yeah.
it's like I'm not aware of that fact. I'm not aware,
Uh-huh.
but it's like an expectation because there are no boundaries either way. So if my boyfriend would set a boundary with me, like a healthy boundary,
Mhm.
in my mind I would interpret it as like, what, you don't love me, or
Uh-huh.
like, you're, why, like, the boundary confused me. And I had to learn over time about the fact that, like that was actually healthy.
But I really wanted to pause right there, because you mentioned about having a healthy boundary.
Hmm.
And then I think this is my how I see it. There are unhealthy boundaries, kind of. I
Hmm.
mean, because like in the cult, in my experience as a member, we weren't allowed to have boundaries. But the leaderships, I mean, they could set boundaries like, hey, like, don't don't talk to me at this time. I want my
Yeah.
privacy. They can have their privacy, but we couldn't. And one thing that I experienced, I'm not sure if you've maybe encountered this, um, but when I started setting boundaries, other people, like in the cult, were saying, Ryan, damn, you're being so rude. How dare you? Like, you're supposed to be open. You're supposed to be transparent. And then it made me start doubting myself. And again, I try to set
Yeah.
healthy boundaries, and people would kind of break them down. Um, my question for you is, when you were in that journey of um, finding yourself and finding your healthy boundaries, uh, how did you stick to your commitment that you're going to be you and you're going to set your boundaries?
I think how I did it was being fed up.
Okay.
Like I was just done. I'm like, I don't want to care anymore on that level about hurting someone else's feelings because I'm setting a healthy boundary. And I think I really learned that um it's a red flag when people get upset with you for setting those boundaries. That's a red flag. And I think I've almost kind of trained myself to have a certain reaction. I think when people don't have boundaries or something, or people try to overstep my boundaries today, now I'm like, okay, like I just I my tolerance is like low, right, for it. I just can't do it anymore. So I think I just got fed up. And also, I mean, it just took so much reflection though. Like I had to really think about things and reflect on things and get to that point of why am I so afraid to speak up for myself or to stand up for myself or to say no? Like, what is stopping me here? It's not real. This is like an imaginary box I've put myself in, thinking that I can't say no, or that, if someone has a problem with me for setting my boundary, which is something I have encountered quite a bit. And, with people I barely know, like people who I have interacted with who didn't respect my boundaries, they would call me every single day, all the
Mhm.
time. Right. Or like, eventually they learn that I'm not simply not going to answer the phone. And I'm not going to feel bad about that because you're overstepping this clear boundary. So I think it just gets easier when it becomes more rational to you. It's not, I'm being a rational person setting a boundary here, and you're being irrational, not respecting that boundary. So it's like reframing everything the way I look at it so that it's not me doing something wrong because I'm not.
Mhm. So thank you so much for really talking about not just the cult, but you also shared about your healing journey, reclaiming your voice, finding the power to even start your own podcast, and kind of like you said earlier, there are parts in your memory that maybe you don't remember, but inviting guests over kind of adds to the context and
Hmm.
provides for a healing journey. Now I wanted to kind of start wrapping things up and ask you a question that I like to ask all of my guests, and that is, what is your truth that heals?
My truth that heals, I would say life is okay. Life is wild. Bad things, it's inevitable. Bad things are inevitable in everyone's life. It's just something guaranteed, and it comes with being born. And I've learned that, all these things I went through, all these challenges in my life, um, in a way, when you're in it, it can be so devastating, and it can feel like, what is the point of this? Or what is like, how do I get through this and things like that? But at the end of the day, like you're I look at these things, I guess, in a way as they're challenges, right? But it's a challenge that I can overcome and a challenge I can conquer. I think something I've learned is that, you can't stop. You can't just give up in life. Life doesn't stop. Life keeps going whether or not you do. And My truth that heals would be that I have been able to persist through these things, that I have found the good in the bad, that I have been able to take the bad and look at it as a challenge that I can overcome in life later. And that's as something that's going to lead me to the next stop. So, and I think that's really important because life is insane, especially if you've been through a cult experience or even, a disability or things like that. And it can be so hard to keep going, especially when you lose your faith in people, which I think being a cult survivor, that's such a struggle for cult survivors is losing faith in humanity, not being
Mhm.
able to trust people anymore. So, but I think keeping persisting and keeping going and understanding that, you know, you can conquer these things and that people are not just bad people, right? Just understanding that no matter what, be yourself, speak your mind, and, don't give up. Because I think there's so many times where I wanted to give up in life and, but at the end of the day, I knew that I have to keep going. So I think, yeah, framing things in a way that keeps you going, that, this is a challenge and I can overcome this and I can learn from this. And so I think looking at life in that way, like, what can I learn here and what can I do? Like, what can I change to make things better has kept me going through everything.
Thank you so much for sharing your truth that heals. And where can the audience find more about you?
Um, I am on Instagram. Well, I have Disillusioned Podcast, and that is with an A, DISA, Disillusioned Podcast on Instagram and Intrinsic Agency on Instagram. And I'm on TikTok. My TikTok is Disillusioned8, again with an A. I will be launching my podcast soon as well. It is going to be probably everywhere that you can watch podcasts, Spotify and Apple. So keep an eye out for that. That will be coming soon, and I'm really excited to finally start airing these episodes. I love all of them. So all my interviews, all my episodes, like I feel like it's like my baby right now. So
Uh, All right, so I'm excited and I'll be tuning in to your podcast when it's out. And it is also on YouTube, correct?
yep. So yep, I believe I'm Disillusioned Podcast on YouTube as well. So I haven't really
Okay.
been on YouTube very much, but I did make my YouTube account. Yep.
Well,
So
well, I know as a podcaster, I mean, it's a lot of work, especially when you're getting into it. And I see that you're going to be very busy. So I'm very excited for you. And um, I'm very thankful for the work that you're doing because, being in the ex-cult community, it's always inspiring to see other former members come out there and be vulnerable and sharing their story. And sometimes it's hard, uh,
oh yeah.
but but because of hearing other people's testimonies, it helped me to say, you know what, I can claim my voice back too. So
Exactly.
thank you for what you're doing.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. And, yeah, it was hard at first for sure to tell my story. I tell you what, it was tough to get to that point. But now I just feel it feels right. It's like almost just like letting that weight lift off my shoulders, telling my story. So thank you. I do appreciate it. I'm really excited.
And thank you for being here on the Truth That Heals podcast.